If you don't have love for the Creator, at least have love for the creatures first. So that answers a lot of atheists, because a lot of atheists are like, well, I don't care about God, but I do love my wife and I love my kids. So Qudat's like, that's good. You're on the right track. That's what the soul of the lover is like. It's like this moth. It can't be separate from the beloved, and it doesn't care about the consequence. So it just throws itself right into the fire, which represents God, the fire of love, of course, and he's consumed by it. There's no more moth that's left, right? So that pain of separation is so great that the only way to resolve that is to dissolve your own, sense of selfhood, which is what's separating that love relationship from being actualized. Where he has this one beautiful image where he says that when you throw yourself, into the fire of love, right? There's nothing there. When you burn in that fire, there's no more you that's left. It's just gone. All that's there is that fire, right? All that's there is God, right? This is wahdatul wujud. Qudat was one of the greatest wahdatul wujud, like Hallaj, when Hallaj said an al-haq, right? That's the divine speaking through him. So Qudat, he has that completely transformed view where everything he sees, it's just God everywhere, literally. For the whole thing, it's about bewilderment, because once you've seen things like this, and once you've tasted, not just seen, or intellectually understood, but tasted the reality of what he's saying, you cannot but be in a total perplexed state, not in a negative perplexity, but in the daze and stupor of love, right? What they call dahsha, right? Or this kind of wala in Arabic. This person's so guided that he goes this way, he goes that way, he doesn't know where he's going. Everywhere he goes, he sees God, right? Which is what we call Hira, right? Like Ibn Arabi, all that Ibn Arabi has to say about Hira, in our eyes, it's kufr, what these people are doing, like Hallaj. We call that kufr, some people say that. And said that's not kufr at all, that's pure tawheed. There's no you left, right? It's pure oneness, and it's pure faqr. And faqr, why in faqr there's no otherness? It's complete nothing. It's just God. Wallahu al-ghani wa antum al-fuqara. Khatibu nas ala qadri uqulihim. And Qudat loves that hadith. He loves it. He says he calls it panda tamam in Persian. It's perfect advice. Perfect advice. He goes, somebody who doesn't have the ahliyah, what can you say to such a person? They're not going to get it. They'll reject it. He says, al-imdad biqadr al-isti'dad. That the divine support will come in accordance with how ready you are. They call it shifa al-ghalil, this kind of, you just feel like you're fulfilled. Ibn Arabi says, well, God doesn't have any of that. He doesn't care whether we worship him or not, right? It doesn't hurt him in any way. So then why would he throw us in punishment forever? And especially when they're finite actions, understanding the uniqueness of the Prophet. So in one passage he says all of the Anbiya are light. Then he says, but Muhammad is Nurtar, he's more light. He's more luminous, right? So it all ties in again to the doctrine of Muhammad in reality. The awalu ma khalaq Allah nuri, right? The first thing that God created was my light. Fundamental obligation God has on him is to find his heart. And he goes, so then why don't you go seek your heart? Go look for it. In one passage he says, go find your heart. And when you find it, grab it and hold on to it. And don't let it go. Don't let that heart go. In one passage he says that God, the heart is the nazargah khuda. It's the place where God looks. He goes, you want to be with God? Just look. He's looking at you already. And remember, the Seljuks put him to death because he was criticizing them for stealing money from the poor. That's why they killed him, because he was literally concerned about the poor so much. Everybody's trying to explain the detached letters, what they are, these mysterious letters. And he says, I'm telling you that the entire Quran consists of huruf muqatta'. They're all detached letters. So when the Quran descends, all the letters came down like this, like that, and then some of them got stuck. That's what we call the detached letters. But the rest of them keep coming down, and then they form into words. And he goes, the Arif Billah, when he reads the Quran and penetrates it, he sees these letters as separated. And then he sees the entire Quran as separated letters. It's all just letters. like floating around. مقططفات and معلقات letters. And he goes, and you go higher, you see all these letters, they go back to original dots, nuqat. And then when you go back, those dots take you back to an original dot. And then that dot is, of course, the beginning. It's like the kun, you know, God brings up the world comes out of this primordial nothingness. That nuqta under the ba, of course, that has many meanings, but in the original orthography of Arabic, those dots were not there. Look at tradition, the very first, right? So it's a kind of presence and absence, right? That means it's nothingness, it's pure nothingness. I don't want to write, but you know, I'm being forced to write. He calls it all in the kitabat. I'm over there and I'm brought back to the world of writing, and I have to put this down on paper. You know, this stuff for you. I don't want to do it, but when I do it, it just comes. You know. So some of his letters, many of his letters, they end with statements like he says, "Kagaz biyayid," you know, like bring the paper, more paper, bish kagaz. It's so amazing. Like the letter literally ends by him requesting more paper from his students. Like I'm writing, bring the paper. Or some of his letters he says, I have more to say, but there's no more paper left. That's why if you look at some of the passages in Nahjul Balagha, it will blow somebody away. Like some of these, this khutbatul bayan, the khutbatul iftikhar. These are incredible. These are they're like we would call them in Sufi language shatahat. He says in one of them, remember, Ana al-awwalu wal-akhiru wal-zahir wal-batinu. It's from the Quran. He's saying this about himself. What is that? That's complete. You know, the whole human frame is just gone. It's just God speaking through him. So it's from that perspective, right? But
let us start with Ayn al-Qudat al-Hamdani, and I think articles, you have interesting articles, and the viewers, the people who are watching us, they can read the articles on Dr. Muhammad Rustam's website. I think The Fire of Love and Ayn al-Qudat al-Hamdani, or A Defend on Iblis, which is a very interesting topic also about Ayn al-Qudat al-Hamdani. But if you want to start as a summary about the doctrine of love and the importance of the doctrine of love in Ayn al-Qudat al-Hamdani, especially because this is a continued tradition in Sufi studies and Islamic Irfani studies. Rumi, Sam'ani, Ghazali, Mayboudi, others, all the great scholars, they talked about the divine love. But let us focus on what is the value added in the doctrine of, or in the theories of Ayn al-Qudat al-Hamdani. So I don't know where you'd like to start. I was reading the symbolism that he was presenting. So if it's a nice place to start with, or maybe he was talking about the nightingale and the rose and the claim of love, which is a beautiful symbolic theme. Or even the symbolism of Majnoon and Layla, and the importance of gaining the Majnoon qualities. Or a third symbolism that he presents also of the butterfly and the candle, where a true lover is like the butterfly, which enters inside that candle until the whole of his existence is burned. So his ego is now burned, or he's shining with the qualities of the beloved. So he's no more him. And there is another symbolism which is mentioned also, where a person visits his master, his arif, and he says on the door that he asks him, who are you? He says, it is me, or he mentions his name. So he doesn't open the door, and the next time when he comes, he says to him that I am you. So then he tells him that now you are ready, because you are coming without an ego. So my question about this, the beauty of such kinds of symbolism, and how we can enter the studying of this concept from symbolism.
All right. So with Ayn al-Qudat, you know, he belongs to this tradition of you know, what they call Muzhab Ishq, right, in the Persian tradition, the school of love. So he was a student of Ahmad al-Ghazali, and he learned from his master how to talk about love in this, you know, totally transformed way, right, where they often equate love to like a fire, very, very common image. And those readers, people who read Rumi and later Persian poets, you would be used to these ideas, because they themselves were working out of this tradition that, like you said, comes from Maybudi before, Sanai, Abdullah Ansari, Ahmad Ghazali, al-Qudat, people like that. So what makes al-Qudat so unique, of course, is number one, he deals with love from a variety of different vantage points. And it's really like one of the main themes in his entire worldview. It's the all-pervasiveness of love, how love, like Rumi also says, that how love is God, right? God is love, and so they equate love, wujud, and consciousness with the divine beloved, which ties into this ternary that you were mentioning earlier from wujud, wajd, wijdan, right? Being, consciousness, bliss. And so al-Qudat really he's a philosopher and a Sufi, and he's really explaining in so many of his writings the all-encompassing nature of love, what love is about, what its symptoms are, what it takes you to, what the steps and stages of love are, how you can find divine love through human relationships. He has a lot to say about how the transformed vision of the person, it usually takes place through baby steps, and first it's through cultivating love for human beings. In one of his passages in his famous book Tamhidat, he says, if you don't have love for the Creator, at least have love for the creatures first. So that answers a lot of atheists, because a lot of atheists are like, well, I don't care about God, but I do love my wife and I love my kids. So al-Qudat's like, that's good. You're on the right track.
He's actually undergoing a true path of love, but he doesn't know.
Exactly. You're gonna that those lesser loves will take you to the greater love if you just follow through. So, but he also has a lot.
Here's an important issue about عشق مجازي and عشق حقيقي, and how can it be a bridge. But also a question, because normally we think that the earthly types of love, or the love to our children, wife, the people we love them, we love food, this is earthly and this is bad, so we should go further. So how عين القضاء?
It's all divine. It's all divine love, right, al-Qudat. But what's required, he says in one of his passages, is you need to have, he calls them Dide Muhammadi, you need Muhammadan eyes. If you have those eyes, which is the equivalent of saying with two eyes, right? You will be able to see God in even the most mundane kinds of love in this world, which is a theme that we're used to seeing in Ibn Arabi and other authors. So al-Qudat also, of course, these authors were never indifferent to beauty, because love naturally brings about beauty. So al-Qudat speaks about falling in love with God through, again, beautiful forms in the world, cultivating that life of beauty. But that's all fine and dandy, getting in this love relationship and living your life, for God and in God and in love with God. But what he really has to say about how to get there, it's through the path of pain and separation and suffering and longing and just going through the difficulties and the trials that come with the life of love. So that goes back to the symbols you were asking about. Like there's one symbol, for example, the moth and the flame, right? The moth, it flies around the flame, and then it throws itself into it. If you look at, outside of, your porch, it's in summer, you'll see all these moths flying around the light, and then in the morning these moths will be dead on the ground because they threw themselves into the flame. And al-Qudat says that's what the soul of the lover is like. It's like this moth. It can't be separate from the beloved, and it doesn't care about the consequence. So it just throws itself right into the fire, which represents God, the fire of love, of course, and he's consumed by it. There's no more moth that's left, right? So that pain of separation is so great that the only way to resolve that is to dissolve your own, sense of selfhood, which is what's separating that love relationship from being actualized. Just like in again, going back, it's always taking us back to the human relationships, right? If a person claims to their beloved that they love them, but then they're selfish, let's say, or they don't give themselves to that person entirely, then they'll say, well, you claim love, but you haven't shown it. You've shown self-love. Real love is when you give yourself completely. the best analogy is with children. That relationship between a parent and a child, that, in my opinion, and I'm sure in the opinion of many others, that comes the closest to the divine human relationship, because love for a child, you would never think about your own self if it comes to anything that the child needs, right? It's not even a thought. Like, it's complete, just love, just this all embracing.
It's innate,
Um,
fitri, we say, or عفوي.
yeah, it's total fitra, and you don't learn it, and it's not, again, you don't go read a book and find out about it, right? You go do it, right? You put in that situation, it's natural. So al-Qudat, a lot of his writings are
This
about.
is easy with your children. It's not easy with the idea or the reality of God.
Exactly right. And again, that's because it's a concept for us, right? And it says that if you have this concept of God in your head, then you'll love the concept, right? Just like if you love somebody, if you love them without having seen them, let's say you saw their picture on the internet and you fell in love with that picture, you fall in love with a picture, an image, or a concept. Maybe you've abstracted a kind of persona from that, but you haven't loved the person. To love the person, you have to know the person. And to really know the person, you have to be with the person. And the only way you can love God is to know God, and the only way you can know God is to spend time with God, right? And that means the dhikr, that means the prayer, that means really immersing yourself in that divine life. And he was young, he died when he was 35 years old, but his whole vision was transformed in this amazing way. So a lot of what he has to say about the life of love, it all has to do with the all-consuming nature. Again, taking us back to the notion of fire, the all-consuming nature of love. That it's a true life of divine love. It's one that it just absorbs the person totally. Where he has this one beautiful image where he says that when you throw yourself, into the fire of love, right? There's nothing there. When you burn in that fire, there's no more you that's left. It's just gone. All that's there is that fire, right? All that's there is God, right? This is Wahdat al-Wujud. Al-Qudat was one of the greatest Wahdat al-Wujud theoreticians and metaphysicians, right? He says that's the normal understanding of things, right? There are three classes. In one of his writings, he says there are, people who know about God's af'al, his sifat, all these things. They know the theological categories well. Then there are other people who can kind of like, they know a little bit more about God's attributes, and then there's the people who know God in a totally different way. They know him as completely the sole actor on this cosmic stage, the divine beloved, all of these things. And he says this is the way of the anbiya and the awliya. He calls it the rah akhirat. It's the road of the afterlife. The people on the other side, that's what they see. When we die, we're all going to see it like that. So he says that you have to cultivate that now in this world. Cultivate that knowledge of the divine, that love of the divine here and now. And that's what he's all about, the transformation of the human being into a completely loving being, loving agent for God and the world. And so it's, and also loving oneself. Al-Qudat has a lot to say about, loving oneself, right? It's kind of interesting because a lot of people think that, the people who are, call themselves Sufis or whatever the term is, that they somehow start to loathe themselves and hate themselves. And that's not true. I mean, what the Sufis end up hating is they hate the false self.
The ملامتية type, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. You know what Mevlana call, he speaks about aql juzvi and aql kulli. What they don't like is that partial intellect, that one that insists on being a separate I from God, and insists on being this unique and authentic individual.
The
Right?
separated ego, you mean?
Separated ego, exactly. Whereas if somebody sees themselves as a reflection of the divine, and if whatever they see as a reflection of the divine, they'll be deeply in love with that. Mm-hmm. And then so the person who walks the way does love themselves, but not as a fallen self, but as a divine self, right, in them, through them. Like Hallaj, when Hallaj said al-Haq, right? That's the divine speaking through him. So in al-Qudat, he has that completely transformed view where everything he sees, it's It's just God everywhere, literally. And of course, this is to be distinguished from, pantheism or some silly term like that.
Doctor, here let me impose an important question before we go to other stuff like the relation between God names and qualities and love, or the relation between Sharia and Haqiqah and the path of love. Here, because you mentioned that Ayn al-Qudat, or even in Irfan, they say everything is a manifestation of God, and they can realize the signs of God all over different places. Here he presents a perception about Iblis. Normally, Iblis is the Shaitan al-Rajim, he's the Mal'oon, is the most bad, the essence in the world. But I'll read something for him. He says, "Oh Iblis, sin was his love for God. Do you know what Mustafa's sin was? It was God's love for him." That is, Iblis falling in love with God was his sin, and God's falling in love with Mustafa was his sin. That God may forgive these sins way before, and those which are to come is a sign for his discussion. I'm not sure, but my question is here: how can Iblis be a lesson for us? How Ayn al-Qudat presents him? How can he see God's signs and letters through Iblis also? Or so there is here a very fascinating theme that he's trying to present. If you'd explain a bit, please.
So this is the famous Tawheed Iblis doctrine, right? In Sufi metaphysics. Ayn al-Qudat is the author in the tradition who defends the Tawheed of Iblis more so than any other author, just quantitatively and also qualitatively. He does it literally. He's like 90 different passages in his writings where he's explaining why Iblis is such a good teacher of love. The long and the short of it is that Iblis, Ayn al-Qudat explains, following Hallaj and Ahmad Ghazali and his own teachers, that he says that Iblis refused to bow down to Adam when God told him to do so. One of the reasons was because he loved God too much that he should then bow down to another person, somebody else. So they call that mukhalafa ta'adduban, right? It's like when Imam Ali did not cross out the Prophet's name, in the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. It was mukhalafa ta'adduban. He didn't disobey him. He just said to him, I would never put a line through your name, like this. So Ayn al-Qudat says that Iblis, how could he turn away from God? God told him, bow down to the angels, and Iblis was like, clearly this is a test. The angels, who were the students of Iblis, they bowed down to Adam. But Iblis is the ripe teacher, pochte. He's the teacher. He knew what the real command was, which was don't bow down, right? And Iblis, so then he takes on all the blame of human beings, the whole blame of the world. He has to be the one who's, going to be sent out of heaven as a way of showing to people what the path to God is. So Ayn al-Qudat has this whole thing about how he says, if you look at Iblis, he took the path of proximity to God through distance from God. And he said that when the distance was created between Iblis and God, that's when the path was made clear. Misguidance was clear from guidance. So Iblis becomes the fall guy, they call him, He's the one who said, fine, I'll take all this punishment from you, if that means that nobody else will bow down to anyone except you. So Ayn al-Qudat has this very exalted view of Iblis. He says, wow, if you look at Iblis, he has fatuwa, that's what he says. He has complete javan mardi. He has this complete chivalry and manliness. Doesn't bow down to anybody else. Loves God unconditionally. And even if God, banishes him out of paradise, he still doesn't relinquish his love for God. And he says that ultimately that ties into a divine plan. And he connects it with other things which would be, too much to get into here. But he connects it to his theology, his understanding of the manner in which human beings, their actions are circumscribed in the world, and how they have to go about, exercising their free will within certain constraints. So he ties the Iblis doctrine to his formal philosophy and theology too. But the greatest teaching for Ayn al-Qudat when it comes to Iblis is that people should be taking a lesson from him, a lesson of aspiration, and how we can learn what true Tawheed is all about, that we don't bow down to anybody else, and that we have too much love We have so much love for the divine that we would never be compromised for anything. So al-Qudat in one passage says, he said, look at he says, look at how excellent was his perfection of love. He had complete love for God. That's what we call, unconditional love that he has for God. Even if God blames him, he still will love him. So we should
so we should thank Iblis for what he has done for us, or we should thank God that he created Iblis for us to learn, or here's the important question, because I recap the hadith that says that if there was no people who sin, God will he will create people that will sin, because so that his names will be manifested, the Ghafoor or the As-Satir. So this is something similar here also.
That's right. Well, Iblis is so al-Qudat in his cosmology, he says there's two perspectives, and they have to work together. One is misguidance, which is personified by Iblis, and the other is guidance, which is personified by the Prophet ﷺ. Iblis represents darkness, and the Prophet represents light. And he has many other images that he explains, gets into, and he says that without the darkness, you can't appreciate the light. So without the misguidance, you'll never appreciate the guidance. And without the guidance, you won't appreciate the misguidance. So Iblis is doing his job of misguiding people. That is his job. He says in the Quran, فَبِعِزَّتِكَ لَأُغْوِيَنَّهُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ. Right? He's telling Allah, he says, by your izzah, your greatness, I will put them all, ighwa, kind of delude them and push them away and make them sin. But it's interesting because nowhere if you look at all the Quranic narratives, there's two things that come out. One is that it's a Christian idea that the devil is evil, right? In the Quran, the Iblis, the word shar is never used for Iblis. It's used for the human nafs, never for Iblis. And in fact, he says to him, Rabbi, unzurni ila yawmi yub'athun. Right? My Lord. So he's better than an atheist because he believes in God. Right? Like Iblis is not an atheist. Right? I mean, he has kufr and he has kibr, right? In the Quran, but he's not, Allah doesn't say he's a mulhid, he didn't believe, he couldn't disbelieve in God. He was in the royal court for hundreds of thousands of years, right? So, but he has a very important function to play then. Right? He has to continue the job of misguidance. Later on, when you get to Ibn Arabi, you have the same function, the same idea, not the exoneration of Iblis, but the idea that Iblis represents Ismul Mudil, the name misguider, and then of course the Prophet represents Ismul Hadi, which is your name, right? The guide. And it's the same idea in al-Qudat, right? These two functions, these two forces work together, misguidance and guidance. And then so, it's kind of like you can't have one without the other. And this is the science of opposites, which again is what Maulana is best known for, the science of opposites. And all the seeds of all of
even
this.
when we read some verses from the Quran, we see how Quran describes Iblis. We see Matrud, Mal'oon, so he'll stay in Jahannam forever. So also we see another side. So maybe we can perceive this idea by saying that even when Ibn Arabi says the person who worships the idols, he's also a worshipper of God. So because he separates between the worshipping al-Ibadة, الذاتية, التكوينية, where everybody is in sujood and in tawheed, but then in the al-Ibadة al-ikhtiyariyة, where you choose. So we can perceive Iblis from two different sides even.
Yeah. And this is when he ties Iblis into his doctrine of his theology of action and these things. He says, if you look at Iblis didn't really have a choice, right? He was kind of created to do this, right? So he says in some of these passages in his writings, he says, if you look at God tells Iblis usjudu li Adam, he tells all the angels usjudu li Adam, right, in the Quran, and then al-Qudat says, but behind the scenes God told Iblis something else. He said, don't bow. Don't bow. You're not supposed to bow. So al-Qudat says there's the command, and it's in Islamic cosmology and theology, you have the two kinds of commands, right? It's the al-amr taklifi and the amr takwini, right? So from the perspective of taklif, or the moral and legal and religious responsibility, you have to do, these actions, avoid those actions. But from the amr takwini, that's the essential nature of a person, the engendering command. And God's engendering command to Iblis was, stay right where you are. Stay right where you are. Right? That goes back again. Yeah, that is very similar to Ibn Arabi. Ibn Arabi, when he explains the Ibada Dhatiya, he comments on that verse in the Quran, وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّهُ, right? And he says that, see, we normally read it like it's amr taklifi. Your Lord has made the determination that you
Especially
should
that the ayah says وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا, so it's amr taklif.
understand.
But you can read it alone and you understand that.
Yeah, exactly, right. So and Ibn Arabi comes and says, well, that's, if you look at it from the perspective of taklif, which is not wrong, that is exactly the context of it, it lends itself to that. That's how everybody reads it. But Ibn Arabi goes, but look, Allah, وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّهُ, your Lord, it's his qada. It's not a hukum or something. It's not in the realm of
You
legal
don't have the
judgment.
choice. Just open your eyes. Just see it.
In the nature of things, that he has made the determination that you will, no matter who you are, you'll only worship him. And that's why Ibn Arabi says, any form you're worshiping God in, even if it's, even if you don't know it, right? The essence of it is you're getting at God. And of course that opens up a whole other, so many other discussions. And he comes to this from many different angles, as does Mullah Sadr too.
So you mean when you see the overall picture and you understand the role of Iblis in the whole existence, and you
Yes,
discover
exactly.
God's beauty in the overall shape. This is what you mean.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Iblis has a very, so there's this one interesting passage in al-Qudat's writings. He because he took it to its logical conclusion, he thought about it, from many different angles. It's very fascinating to read what he says about it. But he says in one passage, he says he was conveying the teachings of his teachers, Sheikh Gurgani, Abul Qasim Gurgani, and others, and Ahmad Ghazali, of course, and these masters in his line. And he said that the discussion came up. So if Iblis is helping us and he's good for us, should we say salat on him, or should we continue the la'nat? Right? And you would think that the answer is we should say salat on him. And the al-Qudat's teacher said, no, you don't say salat on him. That's not his ghada. That's not his nourishment. His nourishment is not going to come through salat. You say salat on the Prophet. Right? If you say salatu salam, the Prophet continues his function as hadi. For Iblis, it's the la'na. You have to throw that at him. La'natullah alayh. You have to whip he's marjum, like you said, right? You got to literally stop. But he says, why? Because that's his function of misguidance. It allows him then to actualize, continue to misguide people. That's his job. His job he's not supposed to guide people. Why would you?
But what's the meaning of isti'adah for Ayn al-Qudat? Because you want to get rid of the bad or the vices of your soul, or purify yourself, so you get away from him, or
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't ever discuss the isti'adah formula, but he uses it in his writings, like everybody does, right? But the isti'adah, if you're using the isti'adah from Ayn al-Qudat's perspective, it's you're putting Iblis in his proper place, right? Everything's about the adab of things, right? So Iblis, you wouldn't have isti'anah from Iblis, right? It's isti'anah. He's meant to be, right? That's his job. He's doing his job, and you're doing your job by saying, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, right? You're pushing him in that direction. So that's all about.
But you're also doing your job to be away from him, or away from his qualities.
Yeah.
That will take you to bad things. So.
Yeah. Yes. You're not. I mean, it would be wrong if somebody, took away from this discussion that Ayn al-Qudat says you should, worship Iblis or try to follow him. No, not at all.
Sure.
I mean.
No, but I mean, does in this idea of Ayn al-Qudat, does he deny that the essence or the that of Iblis is bad, or he will be in hell forever, يخلد في جهنم, or he has another perspective in seeing the issue, or because even in Jahannam people will not stay forever in the
yeah, he does. He doesn't deal with the doctrine that we're familiar with, in the later tradition, fana'un nar, or one of these things. But he does have one passage in his writing. I mean, the implications of his writings are pretty much the same of what someone like Ibn Arabi would say, right? That hell and heaven kind of they remain there because of the divine economy of things, the divine names, right? The Jamal, it has its locus, heaven, and the Jalal has its locus, hell. But Ain al-Qudat does have a passage where he says that, in the end, Allah will forgive everybody. And he goes, and Iblis was one of the sinners, right? He goes, he'll forgive him too, right? So he doesn't like get into where will Iblis be? Will he be in hell being forgiven, or will he be in heaven? Iblis belongs in hell. That's his right. He's right. He's the right. That's the Jalal, or what Ibn Arabi calls the Izzah, right? The Izzah. He calls that Nar Izzat. The fire of Izzah is hell, as juxtaposed with paradise. So Iblis is there, but the forgiveness is another issue, and of course Iblis, Qudat gets into the fact that Iblis will be forgiven, and as I'm learning from the research of my dear friend Oluda Meni Ogonaike, you also find this same idea of the salvation of Iblis even in these West African Sufi authors from the 18th, 19th century. It's very, very interesting. Dan Tafa and these other authors explaining along very similar lines that Iblis gets the salvation at the end.
It's a very deep perspective. We are warning our audience, but also here the issue about Irfani studies and the beauty and the fascinating ideas is that it's an issue of perplexity, confusion, wonder, Hira, what they say Hira.
Exactly.
And maybe ربي زدني فيك تحيرا. Maybe عين القضاء mentioned Hira, or the relation between Hira and love, or if you'd like to mention something.
Yeah, well, he doesn't, his Ain al-Qudat's entire perspective, it's one of tahayyur. The whole thing, it's about bewilderment, because once you've seen things like this, and once you've tasted, not just seen, or intellectually understood, but tasted the reality of what he's saying, you cannot but be in a total perplexed state, not in a negative perplexity, but in the daze and stupor of love, right? What they call dahsha, right? Or this kind of wala in Arabic, right? Many of the early Sufis use this term, as does Ibn Arabi, of course. So Ain al-Qudat has that kind of, somebody who, in one of his passages, he says that the person who's completely given to the love of God, he said this person he calls him bi-ra, he's without a way. He's lost, kind of like lost. Doesn't mean he's lost like he's lost the way. That's gomra. That's another person. That's somebody who needs guidance. This person's so guided that he goes this way, he goes that way. He doesn't know where he's going. Everywhere he goes, he sees God, right? Which is what we call Hira, right? Like Ibn Arabi, all that Ibn Arabi has to say about Hira, right? Ain al-Qudat speaks about many similar things, but he doesn't really use the language of Hira. Hira is not a technical term in his writings. He has other terms, like for example, the one that he likes the word ma'rifat a lot, right? Khud shanasi, self-knowledge, which is divine knowledge. And in one passage he says, it's because it's a pure non-dual metaphysics. He says that, Allah Ta'ala himself is seeing himself, beholding himself. And even on the path, who's the real salik? It's God himself. And then he goes, beyond this, what else can you say? There's nothing left to talk about. So he says that when you reach this stage, somebody who says, Ana al-Haq, like Halaj does, or who says, Subhani ma'adamu sha'ni, like Abu Yazid Bastami says, he goes, excuse them. Ma'dhur, make excuses for them, because you don't understand what they're saying. But trust me, Ain al-Qudat, I'm telling you, it's fine, it's good, this is normal. And it's also the realization of one's nothingness. So the term that he likes the most, of course, is faqr. Faqr, right?
والفقر فقري, or أنتم الفقراء إلى الله.
Exactly. He loves all of these hadiths. And there's one, it says faqr, I think it says kadu an yakuna kufran, or something like this. There's a hadith, that faqr, poverty, is almost
كاد الفقر أن يكون كفرا, أو لو كان الفقر رجلا, or that's to do with the economic stuff, but this, yeah.
Yeah, so some people say the normal interpretation is because if you don't have daily bread, sustenance, it can lead to a kind of disbelief in kufr because you're so worried about your sustenance and or you might despair in God. But Ain al-Qudat says, well, the other understanding is that true faqr, true nothingness before God, it leads to what we conventionally call kufr. For Ain al-Qudat, the word kufr is actually a high level. It's not a low level. He says we're all in, this is called Islam al-Majazi, metaphorical Islam. And he says you should go to Islam al-Haqiqi or Kufr al-Haqiqi. Because kufr at that level, what it means is it's non-duality, right? It's not infidelity in the normal sense. In our eyes, it's kufr, what these people are doing, like halaj. We call that kufr, some people say that. But Quran said that's not kufr at all. That's pure tawheed. There's no you left. Right? It's pure oneness and it's pure faqr. And faqr, why in faqr there's no otherness? It's complete nothingness, just God. Wallahu al-ghani wa antum al-fuqara. Metaphysically, that means there's only God. There's only God.
In talking about Hira and perplexity, so I recall reading an article for Chitek about the faith of فرعون. So I don't know if you remember, the same thing that we're mentioning, like the same interpretation or perception about Iblis, it's applied there about Fir'aun. You recall something there also?
Yeah, so Ain al-Qudat doesn't deal with that in his writings, and the debate, the Iman Fir'aun debate, it comes up a little bit later, after Ain al-Qudat's time. Yes, of course, Ibn Arabi is the best known author for this, but there was a huge tradition, Dawani, and so many others dealt with it, from different angles. But Ain al-Qudat, if you were to ask him, what he thought of that, he would see Fir'aun with the same lens of mercy, and I mean, it would be hard to see him saying anything else other than
But then, how you can answer the traditional Islamic understanding to this stuff? How you can give them a good proof or a justified understanding?
You see, yeah, it's a good. So someone like Ain al-Qudat, and this is the case with so many of these Urafa, right? Ibn Arabi, Shabistari, all these people. Sometimes people think, well, how are you going to convince the faqih or the mutakallim? And we have to remember one thing was that these people themselves, Ain al-Qudat, for example, he was a qadi, he was a judge, he was a Shafi legal judge, he was a mufti. That was his day job. He knew the Sharia inside and out. When they come up with these ideas, so to speak, and they're not just novel ideas, but they're like, it's like a new way of looking at things, right? They would say, look, if you don't see it this way, that's fine. It's not like a doctrine that you have to believe in the Tawheed of Iblis. It's probably better that most people don't believe in these things, right? Some of Ain al-Qudat's own students, when they were following him, he would tell them, he'd be like, look, you're not there yet. You don't understand this. I'm going to give you.
You don't have the ahliya. You don't have the capability, the ability.
Yeah, exactly. And he actually uses that term, ahliya. That's actually one of the terms that he likes to use. You have to be worthy or have the capacity. But if you don't have it, that's okay, right? Because why? Because khatibun nas ala qadri uqulihim. And Ain al-Qudat loves that hadith. He loves it. He says he calls it panda tamam in Persian. It's perfect advice. Perfect advice. He goes, somebody who doesn't have the ahliya, what can you say to such a person? They're not going to get it. They'll reject it. And he said they don't have idrak or ihtimal nakunat. They cannot perceive it and they can't bear it. It's too much for them. So there's this saying, by Ibn Ata'illah, in the Hikam of Ibn Ata'illah, he says, al-imdad biqadr al-isti'dad. Right? The divine support will come in accordance with how ready you are. What's your isti'dad? Do you have, the preparedness, the capacity to receive these things? If you don't, Ain al-Qudat says, we're not going to waste our time trying to explain it to you.
But talking as a doctrine or as theory, so this wide understanding of the mercy of God, or even among people like Iblis or like Fir'aun, or like, so how can we be convinced even within the mystical understanding?
I think you need to take people back to the first principles, right? Take them back to questions like, is God all merciful? Yes, right? Look at.
سبقت رحمته وغضبه. I think they.
Yeah, take them back to those hadiths. take them back to the Quran, the fundamental nature of the divine mercy. Ibn Arabi has one of the best arguments, one of the simplest rational arguments for why humans cannot suffer forever. He says, it's such a simple argument, you know, you don't got to get into all the detailed metaphysics which he gets into. One of his arguments is, he says, well, you know, I can see myself forgiving everybody, right? And he says, our actions, good or bad, they don't hurt God at all. Our ibadah, whether we do it or not, it's not going to injure him in any way. So there's no, you know, they call that a tashaffi. There's no, you know, there's no vindictiveness from God. He's not trying to, you know, like when someone wrongs you and then you go and, like, let's say, punch them, tashaffi. You've gotten back at them. You know, you've kind of appeased
because of
yourself.
hatred or because of your bad
That's
quality.
Right. They call it shifa al-ghalil. You know, this kind of, you just feel like you're fulfilled. Ibn Arabi says, well, God doesn't have any of that. He doesn't care whether we worship him or not, right? It doesn't hurt him in any way. So then why would he throw us in the punishment forever? And especially when they're finite actions. So those are three very strong
Then the issue of justice and the name just al-adl will come, and then especially about very bad people who killed other people and who did very bad things.
You have some of the worst people, pedophiles, murderers, you know, people who you know, like, ruin lives and generations.
They deserve punishment.
They deserve punishment. And, you know, I remember asking one friend of mine this question. I said, you know, like the worst kind of murderous, you know, terrible human being who cuts up people and eats them and does the worst stuff, as we've seen. And they're not just psychologically, you know, ill. They're spiritually ill people. They're sick human beings. There are some very sick people out there in the world that we live in, no doubt. I said to him, you know, so they're going to be saved, like, later on, like they're not going to be punished, like, what about the divine justice? And his answer was very good. He said, well, you know, it's not like tomorrow they're going to be forgiven. This is going to be aeons of punishment for these people. They're not getting off the hook, right? Right? And it's God's promise in the Quran that if you've done, right, وَمَا يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ خَيْرًا يَرَى وَمَا يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ شَرًّا يَرَى. Everybody, whatever you've done, it'll come back to you. You know, they call that Quranic karma. You know, it's coming back, whether here, and you better be happy if it does come back to you here, or there, and that's going to be a lot worse. So some of these guys, it's going to be a long, drawn out process for them.
But it doesn't mean that's forever. As they mentioned, I was reading in one of the Irfani books, I think it's for Maliki at-Tabrizi, a great Arif. He was mentioning that I saw a salik in the haram of Imam Ali is praying that God don't forgive the people who killed Imam Hussein, because he knows the mercy of God. Or he was asking Imam Hussein, don't forgive your enemies.
Exactly. But the Urafa look at it differently, right? Yazid, for example, right? Like growing up, you know, we were told Yazid is the worst human being ever, you know, like, and Shimr and all of these terrible human beings. So it's hard for people to square any of this with, but what about, but where does it say that it has to be an eternal punishment? Like, that's something that because our anger, you know, and look at the difference. It's also in different kinds of people. Look at what Nabi Nur says in the Quran, Rabbi la taj'al al-ardi min al-kafirina dayyara, right? He don't leave a single one of them, right? Don't just get rid of them. That's pure jalal, right? Like, he's just coming with this jalal. And look at the Prophet, when the people of Taif stone him and do all these things, he asks Allah to forgive them. So there are different mentalities and different personality types. But again, you can't convince somebody. You know, I've seen so many people who've heard this argument a million times. You tell them, and they're like, no, I can't accept that, you know, again. So, you know, it's like, I know in the Arab world, and you've seen this, you know, in certain 19th century, 20th century Iraqi authors and authors from Palestine and writing in Arabic there, where they defend Ibn Arabi and all these doctrines, and they get into debates about things like this. These aren't things to debate with people about, you know. I don't think you can ever convince or should try to convince somebody about Tawhid Iblis or Iman Fir'aun or anything, because if you see it, you see it. If you don't, then that's
We
all
can
right.
say كل ميسر لما خلق له. It's not a
Exactly.
big issue, and
Exactly.
خلقنا على
There's no
قدر
point
عقولنا,
in.
as you mentioned. Doctor,
Yeah.
as we reach to the end of this very exciting talk, let us mention something about the Prophet Muhammad, because also I think Ayn al-Qudaa mentions some nice things about the image of the Prophet in his
Oh
doctrine.
yeah.
He says, listen, have you not ever heard that Abraham was a professor of tasting, Moses the possessor delight, and Muhammad the possessor sweetness? So I think
Yes.
you have something to mention about the
Yeah.
beauty of the Prophet.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Because amongst all there are many firsts in his writings, right? He's the first author to do this, the first author to do that. He's the first author to lay out in clear, prose, the at least in writing, and at least as far as we know, because not all the texts in the early period have been discovered, but he is for sure the first that we know of up till now to exposit and explain the doctrine of the Muhammadan reality, the Muhammadan light, in a very clear way. And for him, the person of the Prophet, there's everything that you ever would need for your spiritual life. He says it comes from the Prophet, including the very light through which you perceive God. That's the light of the Prophet. So he has this, very exalted exposition of the reality of the Prophet as it ties into every dimension of human existence, including the doctrine of love. And also when it comes to, understanding the uniqueness of the Prophet. So in one passage he says all of the Anbiya are light. But he says, but Muhammad is Nurtar. He's more light. He's more luminous, right? So it all ties in again to the doctrine of Muhammadan reality, the awalu ma khalaq Allah nuri, right? The first thing that God created was my light, and all of this ties into his deep, appreciation and explanation of the light of the Prophet, and even to the point where he says that even when the Quran says لَقَدْ جَاءَكُم مِّنَ اللَّهِ نُورٌ وَكِتَابٌ مُبِينٌ, and the Quran says, what is this nur that has come from God? What is this? And he says that people who read the Quran, of course, they read black letters on the white page. But the basis of the black letters is the whiteness of the page. He goes, that's not just the regular whiteness of paper, that's light. You need that light to see the black. So again, it takes you back to the darkness and the light. And in order to see the black ink, you need the white light behind it, the light of the Prophet. And he says that the highest level is when you see the white page of the Quran and you don't see the black ink. So that has to do with being engulfed completely by the light of the Prophet. And he says that the person walking along the path, they encounter the nur of the Prophet at every stage. And at the end, that's what they behold. They behold the light of the Prophet. And that's kind of like, what the later Sufi tradition calls fana fir Rasul. This kind of annihilation in the messenger. And
this is also
so
exciting. Like we have fana in God, we have fana in the Rasul as an intermediary point. As you gain the light of the Prophet as much as you can. And in the beginning, you become fani for Rasul, so you become fani in God, I think.
That's right. And it's a very, there are different angles by which some authors write about fana fillah and then fana fi Rasul. Some write about fana fi Rasul, then fana fillah. And there's different ways of...
Because it's to do with going to God and then coming back to guide people. So then you'll reach to fana fi Rasul afterwards. But then if you... it depends on how you look at it.
Yeah, there's many different angles. But our colleague, aforementioned, Olud Amin Ogunaki, has a beautiful article about this called Annihilation in the Messenger Revisited. And he really does an amazing job of explaining all of these different perspectives, and he also brings in al-Qudat actually, so it makes it very interesting. But one of my favorite passages, and probably it's such a telling passage from al-Qudat's writings, which speak about the reality of the Prophet and about how it is our responsibility to know him. It goes like this. He says that, if you look at Abu Jahl and Abu Lahab, right, they saw the Prophet and they didn't accept him. They never accepted him. They died as his enemies. And he says, why? How could they not accept him, even though they were looking right at him all the time? And he says that the reason is because when the Prophet comes, he brings out within you what's already within yourself. So he said, the example he gives is, he says, if you look at the sun, when the sun shines on a pit of garbage, gulkhan in Persian is a pit of garbage, filth. That sun is not, it's not filthy, and bad smells are not going to come from the sun, but the garbage is there, and when the heat of the sun comes, it's going to make the garbage smell. So if you go to a garbage dump in the summer, it's going to smell a lot worse than if you were to go in the winter, because the heat activates all the, the stench, obviously, right? The moisture and all of this stuff, it starts spreading, and the whole place stinks. But the property of filth and disgusting and vileness is in the garbage can and in the garbage dump itself. And he goes, likewise, if the sun shines on a gulshan, so gulshan, on a bed of roses, what's going to happen? Beautiful smells will come. So when the light of the Prophet shines on a beautiful soul, somebody who has the isti'dad, then his nature will be activated by this light, and then all of the beauty will spread outwardly. But by virtue of the light of the Prophet and the nature of that individual, can this relationship obtain.
Great. And as you mentioned, Dr. earlier, that Ayn al-Qadha al-Hamdani was a mufti and qadi and a faqih, and there is always this combination between Sharia and Haqiqah, and so following the path of Sharia will lead to reaching to Tariqah and then Haqiqah. And so how does he present this idea, especially how does he understand the hadith of قرب النوافل قرب الفرائض? I don't know what you call it in English. The messenger of God said that God said, whoever opposes a friend, wali of mine, I declare war on them, and my servant does not come near to me with anything more lovable, ahab, to me than what I have made a duty for him, and my servant continues to come near to me through the further acts of devotion, nawafil, ما زال عبدي يتقرب إلي بنوافل, until I love him. Then when I love him, I'm his hearing with which he hears, his sight with which he sees, his hand with which he holds, and his foot with which he walks. I just read it because it has its beauty in English also. So how does he perceive the issue of that the suluk ila Allah, it's an issue between Sharia and Haqiqah, and how love comes in between also?
No, that's a great question. So one of the really amazing things about Ayn al-Qudat's writings is, because he was, as you said, qadi in these things, and because he had different students. So in his letters that have survived, 3 volumes of letters, which are right here, these 3 here, he deals with Sharia issues from so many different angles. Sometimes they're very straightforward, fiqh discussions, but he won't leave it at that. He'll always get into some little, some inner interpretation, or some little nuance will come out. But his general explanation of the pillars of Islam, the 5 arkan, he sometimes it's like Imam al-Ghazali largely, right? It's like what you find in Ihya al-Ghazali. You'll find him getting into the asrar of the salat, the secrets of the Sawm. But Ayn al-Qudat always takes it to another level because of the vision of love, and because of the emphasis that he places on the oneness of being. So he'll say things like, you know the Shariat's requirements now that you're mature. You have to pray because now you've become mature. And you have to fast because now you've become mature. All of these things. You've reached bulugh, you have bulugh. So you have to go do the things that a bulugh, person who's baligh has to go do. He goes, but more, the most important task ahead of fulfilling all of these functions is to find your own heart. So he makes that very clear. He goes, so someone goes and prays and they fast, but they've not found their heart. So what are they really going to get from that? They're going to fulfill the requirements. They're going to go to heaven. That's fine. But the person who understands the nature of reality, he'll see that the fundamental obligation God has on him is to find his heart. And he goes, so then why don't you go seek your heart? Go look for it. In one passage he says, go find your heart. And when you find it, grab it and hold on to it. And don't let it go. Don't let that heart go. In one passage he says that God, the heart is the nazargah khuda. It's the place where God looks. He goes, you want to be with God? Just look. He's looking at you already. So he's all about fulfilling the rights of Islam and living the Sharia as you must. But he also, like so many Sufi authors, is telling you to invigorate the practice of the Sharia with an awakened heart. So he's against something called, and it's a big idea in his writings, it's called adat, or in Arabic adat, habit. And he goes, somebody who prays the daily prayers, but he does it out of adat, they become adat parast, such a person, habit worshipper, right? He goes, and this person, it's in the grand scale of things, in the divine scale, it's worthless, because he says if you do all these things, you've performed all of these actions, even good moral actions, but you've done it out of habit and without real presence and without real awareness of the divine, then you're going to fall short of the goal. The goal is to see God. He said that's your goal. Your goal is to see God, which is in fulfillment of the hadith nawafil, right? And like Ibn Arabi says, it's not for God, to become your hands and seeing, but it's for you to become God's hands and seeing and feet and all of these things. It's the other way around, right? Where you literally it's complete takhalluq, right? So to partake in the divine order of things, you have to be able to see things from the divine perspective. So in one of the passages when he speaks about fasting, he says, there is the Sawm, the regular Sawm, and then he calls it Sawm-e-Ma'navi, or the fasting of inner meaning. He goes, in the inner meaning the fast of inner meaning, who's really doing the fasting? He says Allah Ta'ala has sifa samadiyya, and so it's a thing in the Sufi tradition that God is samad, right? Samad. And the quality of samad, it's firm, it never breaks. It shows up once in the Quran and Surah Ikhlas, of course, Allahu Samad, and many authors have tried to explain it. It's a very hard word it can mean transcendent. It can mean something like a haven, la jawfun lahu, samad, right? La jawfun lahu. So al-Qudat says, but who is the real samad here? It's God, it's not you. We partake in the fast in order to get a small feeling of God's samadiyya. But we have to break. Yes. That's takhalluq. But he goes, who really is the samad? Allah. So Qazat calls him Sa'im ad-dahr. He's the one who's fasting forever. So again, see how he turns it, the whole thing, it's all wahdat al-wujud, right? So it's pure non-dual metaphysics.
One important issue in al-Qudat is very pure or thick wahdat al-wujud.
Yeah, completely. Or it's just, and he's literally writing from that perspective, and he's calling you to do that. He's saying, look, this is the way I'm looking at things. But al-Qudat has something for everybody. So for people who are like really into that kind of non-dual metaphysics, there's plenty of material there.
This is always a question though. So give me some practical examples, some daily life things, some things. Okay, you talked very nice about the theories and the God is doing everything. He's fasting, he's praying. Even is about, this is from. But also explain to me. So how because I was reading also this nice passage of al-Qudat. The seeker's task is to search in himself for nothing but love. The lover's existence is from love. How can he live without love? Recognize life from love and find death death without love. So I didn't understand the final passage. Maybe you can explain it a bit. But the question also is how to feel it or to embody it or to live it as an ordinary person, not only as very nice and beautiful.
That's right. Right. It's all about the tabdil of the soul of the person, right? You have to transform yourself through what? Through dhikr. So al-Qudat says, the verse in the Quran, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu udhkurullaha dhikran kathira, right? He says, how are you going to do this dhikr kathir? How are you going to do remember God, so much? He says you have to give your whole self to the dhikr of God. Hamigi, your entire being has to be given to the dhikr. So he has very practical teachings. He tells people, you should remember death a lot. That's a very common theme in his writings. Remember death. Give charity. One of his biggest things is he tells his students, give sadaqah every day. And he used to make his students, if they forgot to give sadaqah one day, on the second day, it would be, they'd have to do it like a qada, of your prayers. It would be the qada of their sadaqah. They'd have to do it. So, and remember, the Seljuks put him to death because he was criticizing them for stealing money from the poor. That's why they killed him, because he was literally like concerned about the poor so much. So he says that's one of your obligations.
He was a reformer, a revolutionist. It's not like being an arif, staying and doing dhikr and
no,
having good manners. No, he was in the middle of the society.
And he would do it from the pulpit. He would do it from the pulpit, and that's why the Seljuks were scared of him, because he was the Qadi of Hamadan. He was like the superstar of Hamadan. When he spoke, everybody listened, and they were like, "This guy's dangerous. He's making us look bad." And Ain al-Qudat's own students were working for the government. And he was telling them, why are you serving these people? The Prophet ﷺ said, "Utlub al-ilm law ila bisin." Seek knowledge even to China. He goes, you're following a person who says, "Utlub ad-dunya wa law ila bisin." He goes, you're following this guy. Don't follow these guys. These are sinful, corrupt leaders, So he was very much concerned about feeding the poor. And that was one of the biggest things that he was, and he always told the students, he says, whatever you have, give. So again, that's a practical teaching in Ain al-Qudat. Remembering death, meditating.
What about death? He had a special thing to say also about death and love and all this stuff. Death is always mur'ib for us. It's something.
Yeah, no. He says you have to. He says it's your reality. It's gonna find you. Of course, that's the common view. One passage of his, he says, it's a practical. It's very practical. He says, why would you run away from death when you're going to face it? Like, it's coming to you. If you neglect it, what's that going to do for you? You're just putting off an inevitability.
No, but I'm afraid from all my bad attitudes and bad manners and bad acts. So obviously I'd be afraid of it.
Yeah, of course. People. Yeah, I mean that's good. Mu'ataba, having self-blame. This is good. And very, even the greatest people, when they die, they say, "Oh, I wish I did more. I wish I did this. I wish I did that." That's normal. That's kullukum takrahun al-maut. It's a hadith, right? People have karaha. It's natural. Even the sakratul maut, the pain, the pangs, the displeasure, the discomfort, obviously, of death. But from the other perspective, from the perspective of love, it's a homecoming, right? And so Ain al-Qudat is very much like, look, you're gonna. It's a very practical view he has. He's like, you're gonna die. If you avoid it, then what's the point? And one time he tells one of his students who was afraid of death, he says, I take it that the reason you're scared of death is because your heart is so dark. He goes, that's why. He goes, it's when the light comes and it shines in your heart, then it's like a window that's opened up. That dark room, when the window's open, the sun comes in, and the whole room is illuminated. And there's no difference whether you're inside or outside. So death is just literally a transference of states, right? You go, and it's the beginning. It's just the beginning. It's the end of this life, but it's la tarkabuna tabaqan an tabaq, right? You're going up. You're going continue to go through all these different stages.
Doctor, I don't want to end this very exciting and nice interview, but you've worked too much about. You've studied Ain al-Qudat al-Hamdani for several years now, so if I would want to ask you if you recall a theory or an idea or a passage that went very too much inside yourself, or you وصلت إلى حالة السكر معها, or you liked it, or something you'd like to mention also about Ain al-Qudat?
Yeah. I have to say,
his personality, about his ideas, or something that you feel when you studied, you feel that this idea was very new to you, or something.
Yeah. There have been, so many things, so many moments when you're reading him, and you go back to something you read, and 4 years later you go back to it and you think to yourself, wow, oh, now I get what he's like. I didn't understand it till. So there are a lot of those moments, when you're reading him. But probably the single most unique view, because you don't see anybody before him say it, and a few people after him, has to do with the Quranic detached letters, al-huruf al-muqatta'a. And I ran this idea by different people who work in hurufi texts, and of course Professor Chittick, who knows all of these texts very well, and he even commented that this is a unique thing in Ain al-Qudat. where he explains that, the huruf muqatta, it's, in 27 surahs of the Quran, these detached letters, alif, lam, mim, kaf, ha, ya, ain, sad, like this. And I've seen different authors, take those huruf muqatta and try to explain them in different ways. Mullah Sadra does something very beautiful, which is following a tradition that's still there in Qum today, where he takes all the detached letters and adds them up, minus repetitions, and they spell Ali Siratu Haqqin Numsikuhu. And I verified that, I tried it, and it works for sure. So that's beautiful. But Ain al-Qudat, what he does is he has a theory of the detached letters, and he says that everybody's trying to explain the detached letters, what they are, these mysterious letters. And he says, I'm telling you that the entire Quran consists of huruf muqatta'a. They're all detached letters. So when the Quran descends, all the letters came down like this, like that, and then some of them got stuck. That's what we call the detached letters. But the rest of them keep coming down, and then they form into words. And he goes, the Arif Billah, when he reads the Quran and penetrates it, he sees these letters as separated. And then he sees the entire Quran as separated letters. It's all just letters, like floating around. Muqatta'at and mu'allaqat letters. And he goes, and you go higher, you see all these letters, they go back to original dots, nuqat. And then when you go back, those dots take you back to an original dot. And then that dot is, of course, the beginning. It's like the kun, God brings up the world, comes out of this primordial nothingness. So it ties in this whole idea of the divine word and how it enters into the world and how it, kind of cascades into all these letters, and then from that you have the revealed text. This is an amazing idea. And alhamdulillah, I wrote an article about that, but also in my book, there's more details, and there's also some diagrams. Inshallah, when it comes out, you can.
It's an issue of the الوحدة and الكثرة. Also, Ibn Arabi mentioned that all the existence is letters and words of God. So I think this is
exactly. Everything is a letter and a word. Right? We're all, literally kalimat of God, right?
This is related also to the hadith وأنا النقطة تحت الباء. You mentioned Imam Ali in the beginning, that the saying.
For sure.
And then
Ain al-Qudat.
If Ibn Ain al-Qudat has anything to say about Imam Ali, because
he says,
they talk about Imam Ali. So does Ain al-Qudat present him in a special?
Yeah, he does. Yeah, he says he loves that saying, and he says you should become that dot. That's the goal. It's to become a dot, because the dot, we all came from the dot, from nothingness, right? And then when you get realized in faqr, you're just a dot. This speck. So that nuqta under the ba, of course, that has many meanings, but in the original orthography of Arabic, those dots were not there. Look at tradition, the very first, right? So it's a kind of presence and absence, right? That means it's nothingness. It's pure nothingness.
الحضور والغياب, الفناء والبقاء. The more you're not there, the more you're there.
Exactly. All of these things. And Ain al-Qudat, this is where he's writing from. He's literally writing from that perspective, and it has a real, jadba and a draw. His writings have a really strong presence and power, and it can be a little overwhelming. It's very, I don't know how to explain it. It's not like, when you read some authors, it's a very sober feeling. It's kind of reflective, and with Ain al-Qudat, it's. He's a great genius. He wrote
you can
the
feel
most important
emotions, feelings, and the
intellectual. Like you literally feel his presence, like it's a very strong hal that comes out on the page. It just has this fire. I can only imagine what kind of person he was like. Like he must have just been,
in hermeneutics and Heidegger and these people, they mentioned that when you read a passage, just imagine the person when he was writing the passage in the first time, and what was happening between his pen and between his brain and between his heart. Just try to live the first.
You really see, they're just lost completely in this sea of it's just pure oneness, and it really is this primordial experience of their own nothingness, and therefore their own everythingness. And that's where this is the wahda and kathra, that perspective, just coming from wahda coming to the world of writing. And al-Qudat he speaks about this. He says, he goes, when I don't want to write, but I'm being forced to write. He calls it alim kitabat. I'm over there and I'm brought back to the world of writing, and I have to put this down on paper. This stuff for you. But I don't want to do it. But when I do it, it just comes. So some of his letters, many of his letters, they end with statements like, he says, "Kaghaz biayid," like, bring the paper, more paper, bish kaghaz. It's so amazing. Like, the letter literally ends by him requesting more paper from his students. Like, I'm writing, bring the paper. Or some of his letters, he says, I have more to say, but there's no more paper left. So he had this hal. He was a complete, hal must, they call it, right? Just completely taken by the moment.
It's a manifestation of God's تجليات المعارف الإلهية الحقة على قلوب السالكين الصادقين. I recall a story from علامة طباطبائي. His son was mentioning it is in a documentary. He said, my father was writing his tafsir, his great tafsir al-Mizan, without keeping the dots and the tashkil and all this stuff. So I was amazed. Why was that? Then the other day I asked him. He said to me, I was in a hal and all the knowledge was يتفجر from my heart. So I was afraid that I'll forget some of the things. So I wrote without dots, and then the other day I'll come and I'll write the dots.
Yes, exactly. That's when that's that knowledge we were speaking about, tahqiq. It bubbles up from inside you and it just comes out. That's real knowledge, not like what most people think knowledge is, right? Where you learn, you read books, and you sound intelligent. No, real knowledge comes from God. Ittaqullah yu'allimukum Allah. Allah will teach us. You don't need to even learn books. Some of the greatest arifin weren't scholars. None of the anbiya were book readers and scholars. The greatest never write, right? The greatest of the great never write.
Although they were maybe also shepherd or a person who works in the garden or a farmer or something like this.
And look at them, carpenters, and look at these individuals changed all of human civilizations because they were sent by God. They're the messengers. The people directly taught by God.
Doctor, the issue that you mentioned, the نقطة أنا النقطة تحت الباء. So because we came from it, so how can we understand it? Because we came from God, and then comes the حقيقة محمدية. So how we can understand the whole hadith? Everything is from the hamd, and the hamd is the bismillah, and bismillah from the ba, and وأنا النقطة تحت الباء, and the role of Imam Ali. So just if you can give a summary about this point.
Well, because everything comes from the divine command, right? Kun, right? That's how the universe came into existence, right? And the kun is that first point. That's the point, right? Once that point comes in, once that primordial, manifestation takes place, then you have the entire universe kind of manifesting from that singular point. And someone like Imam Ali, when he discloses this about his own, reality, right, that's because he understands exactly what it means to go back to the origin. He's completely, immersed in that ocean of tawheed and oneness, and so he doesn't see this kind of, duality and otherness. That's why if you look at some of the passages in Nahj al-Balagha, it will blow somebody away. Like some of these, this khutbatul bayan, the khutbatul iftikhar. These are incredible. They're like we would call them in Sufi language shatahat. He says in one of them, remember, ana al-awwalu wal-akhiru wal-zahir wal-batinu. It's from the Quran. He's saying this about himself. What is that? That's complete. The whole human frame is just gone. It's just God speaking through him. So it's from that perspective, right? But insofar as there is an ana, and you're not God as a human being, then you're a dot, right?
In one of my interviews, I was discussing with a professor, and he told me that I've taught Rumi, Ibn Arabi, Al-Attar, many great scholars and the Urafa, but when I come to Nahj al-Balagha, like I describe Nahj al-Balagha as only for adults, also compared with all different Arabs.
Yeah, and then even the Arabic of Nahj al-Balagha is it's like the best Arabic. I mean, it's so beautiful and so incredibly, you need so much training and so much sophistication just to, people read Nahj al-Balagha, even Christians read Nahj al-Balagha, Christian Arabs, because of the beauty, because of the literary beauty. There is a new English translation coming out of it soon by my colleague from the University of Chicago, well-known scholar Hira. She's doing a brand new Arabic edition and translation of it for the Library of Arabic Literature, and she's really, you know, a master of Arabic language and literature and a great lover of Imam Ali. And she's done, you know, a number of already very excellent translations and editions of books and studies. So that would be, I don't know, maybe I guess in 2 or 3 years it's coming out, but that would be, you know, a real treat for English readers, because I don't know if there is a direct translation from Arabic into English. I mean,
Not
we
a
grew
very
up, you
popular one
know,
until now.
yeah, and we grew up reading the one, you know, the one that's common in the masjids. That comes from, I think that's an Urdu translation, and then the Urdu, which wasn't a good translation, was then translated into English. I don't think it was directly from the Arabic. I could be wrong about that, but, and I've seen one in Iran that came out through Ansarian publications many, many years ago. But again, I think that was not directly from the Arabic, but I could be wrong. But Professor Qutubuddin's translation will be a really nice one, I'm sure.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed Rustam. But by this, we reach to the end of our very long and exciting and nice interview, and especially about Ayn al-Qudat al-Hamadani and love and divine love. And this is one of the goals, actually, of such interviews and talks with many different professors, is to present the beauty and the depth of the Islamic Sufi tradition and the Islamic Irfan, and to explain to people, because nowadays many people talk about Islam, it is only about fiqh or Sharia or Zahir, or it's only qawaneen. So we are fed up about this stuff, and some of the bad representatives we see here and there, plus the media and what it does. So one of the main goals is to show the beauty of such knowledge.
Yeah, I agree. You know, we need this more than any other time. People are, you know, like you said, they're starving for this. They need to know about these things, and you know, it'll encourage people then to have a deeper relationship with God, right? No one's saying to there's, you know, you don't give up the rights of the Sharia. You deepen your relationship, and you know, for some that's a lifetime of, you know, immersion, but you know, one's got to keep knocking, and inshallah Allah will one day open that door.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
Thank you so much.